In the 1920s, Americans thought the deadliest threat of prohibition was the mafia. They were wrong, because the truth is, the US government quietly poisoned its own people, on purpose, not to kill criminals, but to frighten ordinary citizens into obedience. 1920, the 18th Amendment. Alcohol becomes illegal overnight across the United States, but instead of giving up drinking, America simply goes underground. Speakeasies explode, bootleggers get rich, and the federal government gets desperate. As the 1920s roared on, the government's war on alcohol was failing. Enforcement was a leaky sieve, and public defiance was rampant. Frustrated and facing what they saw as a national crisis of lawlessness, officials in the Coolidge administration felt backed into a corner. Instead of admitting defeat, they made a decision so extreme, it was deliberately buried in bureaucratic paperwork, remaining hidden from public knowledge for decades. The plan was simple and quietly authorized by the Treasury Department. It centered on a legal loophole: industrial alcohol. This was pure ethanol, chemically identical to the spirit in whiskey or gin, but it was manufactured tax-free for use in perfumes, paints, and scientific research. To prevent it from being diverted into the beverage market, the law required that it be denatured, mixed with chemicals to make it undrinkable. At first, these additives were relatively harmless. But that was about to change. The government ordered chemists to create new, far more toxic denaturing formulas. They mandated that for every 100 parts of ethyl alcohol, there must be 10 parts of a deadly poison. The goal was no longer just to make the alcohol taste bad, it was to make it an instrument of chemical terror. The new recipes were a cocktail of lethal substances, with methanol, chloroform, benzene, and even cyanides. Then, they waited. The strategy was a chilling calculation. They knew that criminal syndicates were stealing enormous quantities of industrial alcohol, hiring rogue chemists to renature it, and then selling it to an unsuspecting public. They knew these bootleggers would get their hands on this newly poisoned supply. They knew it would be rebottled and sold in speakeasies, straight to American citizens. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that people would die. It was, in effect, a state-sanctioned poisoning of its own population. Within months, hospitals from New York to Chicago are flooded. People are collapsing with seizures, going blind, dying in hours.
This is not moonshine. This is chemical warfare.
By 1926, over 700 people are confirmed dead from poisoned alcohol in New York City alone. The official U.S. response:
the government cannot be held responsible for people who break the law. We did this, and we're not sorry.
The New York City medical examiner, Dr. Charles Norris, publicly accuses the government of murder. He is ignored. By 1927, the crisis had reached a horrifying scale. What began in the dark corners of New York City had metastasized into a national plague. The death toll climbed relentlessly, with conservative estimates placing the number of fatalities at over 10,000 American citizens. And for every person who died, countless more were left permanently injured. The cause was not a disease, but a poison, deliberately introduced into the nation's illicit alcohol supply. The government's weapon of choice was often methanol, a simple but brutally effective chemical. When ingested, the human body metabolizes methanol first into formaldehyde, an embalming fluid, and then into formic acid. This is the very same poison found in the venom of ants. This acid is what makes the poison so devastating. It relentlessly attacks the central nervous system, with a particular affinity for the optic nerve. Victims would first go blind, their world plunged into darkness before their bodies began to shut down completely. It was a slow, agonizing death, delivered one drink at a time. These weren't the casualties of gangland warfare. They weren't killed in shootouts over turf. This wasn't the result of bootleggers making a bad batch of moonshine. This was the direct, calculated consequence of their own government's secret policy. And perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire chapter of American history? The public never truly understood the scale of the betrayal. The official story was buried in bureaucratic jargon and blame shifting. The history books, for the most part, never mentioned it. The story of the government's war on its own citizens simply faded away, a ghost in the nation's memory, as if it never happened at all. Prohibition ended in 1933, swept away by the 21st Amendment. The saloons reopened, the speakeasies vanished, and the nation collectively exhaled. It was declared a failed experiment, a misguided attempt at social engineering that had backfired spectacularly. The official narrative closed the book on this chapter of American history, filing it under a lesson learned about legislating morality. But the lesson was not about alcohol. It was never just about the drink. The true, chilling lesson was buried beneath the headlines, hidden in the coroner's reports and the quiet grief of thousands of families. It was about control. It was a demonstration of the terrifying calculus a government might employ when its authority is challenged. When the law is disobeyed on a mass scale, what measures become justifiable? The denaturing program was the answer. A deliberate, calculated policy that turned a common substance into a poison, knowing full well it would be consumed, and how far a government is willing to go to stop you from disobeying it. The state became the poisoner, all in the name of upholding a law that the people had rejected. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. A choice to sacrifice citizens to make a point. The story serves as a permanent, documented warning. The mechanisms of power, once established, do not simply disappear. They lie dormant, waiting for a new crisis, a new justification. Subscribe to Chrono Vault, because history doesn't repeat itself. It waits to be ignored again.